Nathan Roberts sat in his spacious, minimalist office overlooking the bustling city below. He'd spent years building his retail empire, starting with a single high-end store and expanding into a successful chain. His journey hadn't been easy. As a Black entrepreneur, he'd faced challenges most CEOs could only imagine. But with tenacity, vision, and an unshakable commitment to excellence, he'd established a brand synonymous with elegance, luxury, and respect. Or so he believed. Recently, though, murmurs of something unsettling had reached him. Despite the polished image, he'd begun to hear reports of discrimination in his stores. Black customers shared stories of cold treatment, dismissive looks, and even outright disrespect. Some employees seemed to assume that Black customers weren't fitting patrons for a luxury store. Nathan couldn't ignore these claims. They disturbed him deeply, not just because they could damage his brand, but because they violated the values he'd woven into the very fabric of his company. Still, he knew that showing up as the CEO would only prompt his staff to be on their best behavior. To get to the truth, he needed a plan, a bold one. Nathan decided he would go undercover, disguised as a regular customer, to see how his staff treated people who looked like him but without the title. Nathan's first call was to a professional makeup artist, Lisa, a skilled artist who had worked on disguises for film and theater. When she arrived, they spent hours perfecting the look. Using specialized makeup, wigs, and clothing, Lisa transformed Nathan into an everyday man. His usual clean-cut look was gone, replaced with casual, somewhat worn clothes. When she finished, Nathan barely recognized himself in the mirror. He no longer looked like the polished, sharp CEO who commanded attention. "This should do it," Lisa said with a smile. "No one will suspect a thing." "Perfect," Nathan replied, looking at his reflection. He felt an odd sense of nervousness, but knew this was the only way to see his store through the eyes of an average Black customer. As he walked into the store, the familiar luxury and elegance surrounded him. But this time, he was merely a visitor. Nathan noticed the lack of greetings and respectful nods he was accustomed to receiving. Employees carried on, seemingly indifferent. He started browsing the aisles, deliberately picking out items to see how they'd react. Within minutes, he felt a subtle shift. As he examined a high-end jacket, a tall employee named Mark approached him. But instead of a warm smile or helpful demeanor, Mark looked irritated, his arms crossed. "Can I help you?" Mark's tone was flat, almost annoyed. Nathan, keeping his voice casual, asked, "Does this jacket come in a larger size?" Mark barely looked at the item before responding, "I don't think you can afford that. Maybe try a different section." Nathan felt a jolt of anger and hurt, but he kept his composure. He wasn't just upset by the words, it was the underlying assumption, the barely concealed contempt in Mark's voice. Undeterred, he continued through the aisles, interacting with more staff members. Each time, he faced dismissive attitudes, cold stares, and condescending tones. No one seemed eager to help him, and some even avoided eye contact. The experience was far worse than he'd anticipated, and he realized just how deep the prejudice ran. When he reached the cashier to make a small purchase, Emma, the cashier, handled the transaction with minimal contact, avoiding his eyes and treating him as if he were invisible. Nathan left the store feeling a complex mix of emotions: disappointment, anger, and determination. The next day, Nathan arrived at the store as himself. Dressed in his usual sharp suit, he walked in with purpose, his presence commanding immediate attention. The employees straightened up, and some offered respectful nods and greetings. It was a stark contrast to the previous day, and it only solidified his resolve. He called a meeting with the entire staff, As they gathered in the back room, Nathan could feel the tension in the air. He remained calm, but his voice carried an intensity that made everyone pay attention. "I want to talk to you about something very serious," he began. "Yesterday, I came into this store as a customer, not as your boss, but as a regular person." A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Mark shifted uncomfortably, and Emma looked puzzled. "I disguised myself," Nathan continued, meeting their eyes. "I made myself look like someone you wouldn't recognize, and what I experienced was, disturbing." The room grew tense as he recounted the events of the previous day, describing the dismissive attitudes, the condescending tones, and the blatant assumptions based on his appearance. He didn't name names yet, but he didn't need to. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and his employees began to realize the severity of their actions. "I'm not just disappointed," Nathan said finally, his voice growing quieter but no less powerful. "I'm angry. Angry that this behavior is happening in my store. Angry that some of you think it's acceptable to treat people differently based on the color of their skin." The room was silent, the employees visibly shaken. Mark looked down, his face pale, and Emma bit her lip, clearly understanding her role in the events. Nathan wasn't finished. He announced that each employee would undergo a similar experience to understand the impact of their actions. They would be transformed and taken to different stores where they might face the same treatment they had inflicted on others. The employees were stunned, but none dared to protest. They recognized that Nathan was serious, and they feared what lay ahead. The next day, the transformations began. Each employee was given a new appearance, disguised as black men and women. Nathan accompanied them as they ventured into other stores and establishments, facing dismissive glances, cold shoulders, and outright prejudice. Some employees were ignored in clothing stores. Others were seated at the back of restaurants or not served at all. They felt the sting of discrimination, and it left a profound impact. By the end of the day, they returned to the store, devastated. Mark, who had been so arrogant just days before, was visibly shaken. Emma had tears in her eyes, unable to shake the pain of what she'd experienced. Nathan gathered them once again. "Now you've felt it, the pain, the humiliation, the anger. This is what you've been putting people through day after day, and it stops now." The employees nodded, some too overwhelmed to speak. Mark stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't realize. I didn't understand." Nathan looked at him, his expression softening slightly. "It's not enough to be sorry, Mark. You need to change. All of you do. And I'm going to help you do that." From that day forward, the store was different. Nathan implemented new training programs focused on empathy, respect, and the importance of treating every customer with dignity. The employees began participating in community initiatives, working with local organizations to identify and address other businesses with similar issues. They partnered with lawyers, law enforcement, and activists, aiming to root out discrimination wherever it thrived. Each week, the employees spent an hour after closing time working on this broader mission, learning and growing together. Under Nathan's leadership, they became advocates for equality, using their experiences to educate others. As weeks turned into months, they pushed forward with their mission, tracking down businesses where they'd heard of discriminatory practices. Some owners resisted, others denied the claims, but Nathan and his now enlightened employees approached these situations with empathy, sharing their own stories and urging others to change. Over time, the store's transformation became a beacon of hope in the community. Word of their mission spread, inspiring other businesses to adopt similar practices. Nathan's store became known not just for its luxury items, but for its dedication to fairness and respect. One evening during a debrief session, Mark shared an experience he'd had that day. He'd visited a coffee shop that had been reported for turning away Black customers. At first, the owner refused to listen, but Mark persisted, sharing his own story and the pain of experiencing discrimination firsthand. Eventually, the owner's attitude softened, and he apologized, promising to make changes. The employees listened in silence, filled with pride and hope. They realized they were making a difference, one conversation at a time, one business at a time. Years passed, and the impact of Nathan's mission continued to ripple outward. His store had become more than just a retail business. It was a symbol of progress, a testament to the power of empathy and understanding. Nathan's employees, once blind to their own prejudices, had become advocates for equality, training other businesses, speaking at events, and continuing their mission long after the initial goal had been met. One day, as Nathan looked out over the city he loved, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had achieved so much, but he knew there was still work to be done. The fight against discrimination was an ongoing battle, one that required constant vigilance. In a meeting with his team, he said, "We've done good work here, but this is just the beginning. Racism is still out there, in places we haven't touched yet, but we've proven that change is possible. If we keep doing what we've been doing, one person at a time, one business at a time, we can spread this change farther than we ever imagined." The employees exchanged determined glances, knowing the journey wasn't over. They were ready to continue, to carry the torch of empathy and equality into new spaces. In the years that followed, Nathan's mission reached neighboring towns and cities. Other businesses reached out, asking for guidance, eager to implement the same changes. Some even requested to undergo the same undercover experience, hoping to understand the impact of racism firsthand. Nathan's company became a symbol of hope and progress. His employees, once oblivious to their own biases, had grown into leaders of a movement, using their experiences to inspire others. They spoke at conferences, worked with community groups, and continued their mission long after Nathan had retired. As Nathan reflected on his journey, he knew the seeds of change they had planted would continue to grow, passed down to new generations. And though the fight against discrimination was far from over, he believed they had made a lasting difference. Together, they had changed lives, challenged prejudices, and proved that even the smallest actions could create a ripple effect that would echo for years to come. And in a world still striving for equality, sometimes hope was enough to make all the difference. This expanded narrative dives into the psychological and emotional journey of each character, illustrating the impact of Nathan's undercover mission and the store's transformation over time. Through reflective moments, community outreach, and personal growth, the story captures the depth of their journey and the legacy of change they built together.